Good morning. It is Wednesday, May 20th. Happy Science Wednesday. This week we are going to be talking about biodiversity and the impacts on ecosystems. So checklist for this video today. We're going to go through a daily discovery on zebra mussels. In this video, we are going to cover review book pages 110 to 112 on biodiversity. You may or may not want to follow along with the review book, but it is not necessary. And then I'm going to explain your two tasks this week. One is to read A Spring Without Bees, Chapter 3, The Impacts of Colony Collapse Disorder, and then a short video called How Wolves Change Rivers. Then we will discuss the choice activity and the quiz that's due by Sunday on the content from this week. So you've probably seen these little guys if you've ever been in or around Lake Champlain. So you have what you'd call a native mussel here, but then you have all these invasive little mussels that are attached to this, what we call native mussel. So these are called zebra mussels. And the first question I want to discuss is, how did zebra mussels get to Lake Champlain? They're not native to Lake Champlain, they are native to Europe. And what happened is ships came in the 1980s from Europe through the St. Lawrence Seaway and made their way into Lake Champlain and the Great Lakes. And in the bottom of these ships, they have something called ballasts, which constantly filter water and then spit water back out. And what happened is some species from Europe ended up making their way all the way through to the United States, what is now the Lake Champlain. So why do we care? Other than being a nuisance, if you've ever scraped your foot or your hand on a zebra mussel, you know that they're just a nuisance to Lake Champlain. But how do zebra mussels affect the native species in Lake Champlain? So the first thing we want to define is, what is an invasive species? And zebra mussels are considered invasive because they are not native, they're not local to a specific ecosystem. What they do is they filter out the essential algae that the native species need for food. So there are species that are supposed to be living in Lake Champlain, eating algae and being a basic part of food chains. And what happens is these invasive species cause unnecessary competition. So when we talk about the environmental or ecological impacts of invasive species, we're talking about how do they affect the species that already live in that area or that habitat. So some environmental impacts that the zebra mussels have is they attach to native species, like literally attached to them, and they can take nutrients from organisms that belong. They have no natural predators, so their population just grows unchecked because they outcompete the native species for food, space, etc. When all that algae is taken up too, and the ecosystem stability is upset, that can also result in poor water quality. Economic impacts, we usually think of, how does this affect humans and how does this affect humans in terms of money? So zebra mussels can clog water intake systems, which is really expensive to fix. They can attach to boats and cause a lot of money and damage. And then fishing industries and other industries that rely on Lake Champlain can suffer due to poor water quality or that damage that we just discussed. So this is just a little intro into this week's lesson, which is a quick lesson on biodiversity. This is only 2 pages of the review book, so I figured we would just go through it together. Biodiversity is defined as the measurement of the degree of species variety in an ecosystem, which basically just means the more biodiverse an ecosystem is, the more different kinds of species live there. A couple of things about biodiversity Interrelationships and interdependencies of these wide variety of species is what keeps ecosystems stable. More biodiversity, more stability. This stability allows the ecosystem to survive by acting like a barrier to destruction of that ecosystem by disease or invasive species coming in. So an ecosystem is less likely to collapse due to disease if it has a lot of variety in it. This creates a predictable pattern of population increases and decreases over time to keep an ecosystem stable and keep it from collapsing. So here's an example of two ecosystems, and I want you to think about which would be more stable if a disease or an insect were to attack one population within each of these ecosystems. Which would be more likely to survive? On the left, you have a naturally biodiverse forest ecosystem. And on the right, you have what's called a tree farm, where it's just one type of species or one population. So hopefully you're thinking that the natural biodiverse forest ecosystem would be more likely to survive if just one population were affected. The more different types of species you have, the more resistant the total ecosystem will be to destruction. The loss of biodiversity upsets the stability of an ecosystem. So we're just going to quickly talk about ways that biodiversity could be reduced or upset. So when you remove any species from an ecosystem, you are decreasing biodiversity by removing that species. And those species might remove a critical niche that the species fills. And remember, a niche is just the job that a certain species plays in an ecosystem. So this can result in what's called a trophic cascade. So if you remove, let's say, algae from a Lake Champlain ecosystem, that is going to cause a ripple effect or a cascade where the organisms that eat the algae won't have enough to eat. The organisms that ate those would then not have a food source, and so on. And not only would that affect the biotic factors in the ecosystem, it would change the water quality as well. What can also upset stability in an ecosystem and lead to the decrease of biodiversity are things like natural disasters. Wildfires, climate changes, floods, all of these can destroy habitats and thus lose biodiversity in an ecosystem. If left alone after the natural disaster for thousands of years, sometimes habitats can return to normal, and that's called ecological succession. So if a wildfire destroyed, for example, a few years ago in Altona, there were wildfires that destroyed ecosystems. If left alone for thousands of years, you will see them come back, but typically, it's not in our lifetime that we'd be around to see it. Of course, there are human activities that decrease biodiversity, one being deforestation or clearing of land for farming, which can lead to overgrazed land and soil erosion. Also, large-scale destruction of habitats like the rainforest, and introducing, whether we mean to or not, humans introduce invasive species to ecosystems all the time, like the zebra mussel. That can cause a decrease in biodiversity and upset the ecosystem. Interdependencies between populations in an original ecosystem might be so great that if once biodiversity is lost, the ecosystem may never recover. For example, clearing tropical rainforests might never recover in our lifetime from that. So why do we care as humans? Obviously, we should care about ecosystems, but when it comes to biodiversity and how it benefits humans, the number one concern is resources, both ones that we know and that are currently unknown. So the genetic diversity of the rainforest, for example, provides humans with medicines and natural insecticides. So there are some key ideas here. If we destroy ecosystems, we are going to lose the biodiversity that they hold. This could mean resources like medicine, this could mean recreation, or it could just mean aesthetic value. The beauty in nature would be gone. Last key idea that I'm going to leave you with is that as diversity is lost, potentially valuable resources are lost with it. So again, biodiversity just means how many different species are living in an ecosystem, and the more biodiverse an ecosystem is, the more stable it will be. All right, so what do you have to do this week? I want you to apply your knowledge of biodiversity to two separate but similar concepts. So the first thing that you're going to do is read chapter 3 of A Spring Without Bees, which is called The Impact of Colony Collapse Disorder. It's only 5 pages long, so it won't take you too long to read through. But while you read through that chapter, and the PDF is on Schoology, I'll take you there in a minute, I want you thinking about this key idea. What happens when you remove a key species like the honeybee from an ecosystem? You're also going to watch a 4.5-minute video called How Wolves Change Rivers. This is a similar concept where we are disrupting biodiversity, but this time you're going to focus on what happens when you return a key species back into an ecosystem. So when we talk about the bees, you're going to talk about and focus on what happens when you remove a species from an ecosystem. And then with the wolves, you're going to see what happens when you return a key species to an ecosystem. Okay, before we talk about the Zoom, I'm going to take you over to Schoology so that you can see where all these resources are. So May 20th, you need to watch this video greeting, read the chapter on Spring Without Bees, 5 pages, and then watch a 4.5-minute video. Just like usual, you'll take your quiz by Sunday. So when you click on the link, you will find the PDF to the chapter of the book that you need to read, and that will show up on your screen. You will find the video that you need to watch. If you hear that howling in the beginning, you are at the right place. I've also added, some of you have noted that it's kind of hard for you to focus during the videos. So if we had been watching this in school, I would have given you these video notes to fill out. So if you're finding that you can't focus on the video, you could answer these questions either physically or just in your head as you go through. You don't have to turn this in. I don't need this. This is just for you as an option. And then when all's said and done, you're gonna take the quiz from this week, and it clearly tells you what you need to know before you take this. So you need to watch this current video on biodiversity, read the chapter, and watch the video. Okay. I am also going to offer a choice if you would like to attend a Zoom meeting today. So reasons that you might want to attend today's Zoom from 2 to 2:30. I know we don't have a lot of review book questions or anything this week, but maybe you have questions on any part of this week's assignment or quiz. 2, maybe you have questions about grading or attendance. 3, maybe you're behind and you just need clarification on what you need to do to get caught up. 4, maybe you want to go over a quiz from previous weeks if you didn't get credit, for example, or if you have, if you're not sure why certain things were marked wrong. Or if you just want to pop in and say hi to people from our class who might be in the meeting, you are more than welcome to just pop in and say hi. Last thing I'll leave you with is expectations for the Zoom meeting. I will send out the code via the Remind app 15 minutes prior to the meeting. Do not share the Zoom code with someone who is not in our class. Only log in as yourself and behave respectfully at all times and participate when prompted. All right, well, that does it for today. I will see hopefully a lot of you today, 2 to 2:30 via Zoom. And the sooner you get your work done for this week, the sooner you can be done with it. All right, quiz due no later than Sunday night, and have a great week.